Well, Josh here, and this is my review of Twilight, the graphic novel, Volume 1. So I presume they're splitting it up into two at the rate of the story progression goes. I have no clue when the second one will be released, but I'm going to review what I currently have in my hands. Alright, so, first things first, if you don't know the story of Twilight, honestly, just go look it up. You probably already do at some point, whether through hatred of it, love of it, just generally about hearing why it's breaking some opening weekend records, so on and so on. It's a love story. Get over it. So, since I have not reviewed the original Twilight novel or the original Twilight movie on this channel, I'm going to go ahead and do a quick review of what I think of this story in general, for I presume the graphic novel is going to follow it closer to verbatim than the movie at the least. Basically, I think that the story itself is good. If anything, I would say though the conflict is very poorly developed, as it is in pretty much all of the Twilight novels, where it just kind of pops up out of nowhere. Some people say this is realistic. I call it really bad planning, and I realize it's a romance story, but if you know what, you really got to tie that shit in earlier. The same thing's going to happen in the graphic novel, although frankly it never even appears in this graphic novel yet, so I mean it's going to be in Volume 2, which I presume will probably again follow the story pretty closely. I thought the movie did a decent job of improving on that by at least introducing them prior to the end, or the climax, but not so here. Following the book very much verbatim, particularly in the dialogue. A lot of people have a problem with this. I'm just going to segue quickly into this and say, I think the dialogue is fine. Honestly, it is melodramatic, but I don't think there's anything necessarily the problem with that, considering the voice of the novel is from a teenage girl, and many of these things, they don't feel like they are from an adult, since it was written by an adult, so you gotta praise it for at least that. Overall, I do like the story, I'll admit it, and I think Twilight the graphic novel does a good job of replicating the novel's feel. It spends a little more time with characters. I am kind of apprehensive to judge it, seeing as I do not have the actual end to this story, so how they portray it in the second half, this Volume 2, might actually affect my judgment of this one in retrospect, but for now it's developing nicely, and I really don't have too many complaints. I appreciate that they've included Mike Newton a lot more than they did in the movie, though admittedly I understand why they cut his role down. And overall, I think it comes to a nice point. Actually, I was kind of surprised they left it at a decent point for a cutoff. I didn't think there even would be one, but yeah, I can see it. So, enough with the story. Like I said, I like it. I don't think it's bad, and that's for another video. For now, let's get on to the bulk of the graphic novel itself, which is the art. And I just wanted to address one thing, is that that people are really complaining about the text bubble placement in this graphic novel, and I did not really have a problem with it. For one thing, a lot of people are complaining that it is in Times New Roman font, which, outside of sounding incredibly picky for me, doesn't really seem like a problem. Considering this is an adaptation of a novel, I thought it gave a more novel-like feel to the graphic novel. And as for bubble placement, frankly, I didn't find it interfering with much of the art, if any. The only one thing I will admit is that the bubble lines is indicating where they came from. Definitely kind of odd. It gets really jumbled at times. You know who's speaking, but the rate and order which you're supposed to read them in is sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes interrupted by that. Otherwise, the stuff they covered was something like Mike Newton's face when Bella wasn't paying attention to him, and I actually found that rather appropriate, considering. So I think it was necessarily a stylistic choice in most cases. As for people saying the art style, they don't like the art style, honestly, that's perfectly understandable. It is drawn in a very manga-like fashion, and even though it would be technically classed as manhwa, I believe, but regardless. Anyway, I do like the art style personally, but you may vary. This is much more realistic than most manga art, so don't worry if you're not really into manga. You probably will appreciate it. Just know that the general expressions that they would make, and you'll be fine. Otherwise, it's a really high-quality book, I gotta say. It was expensive. It was about $19 Canadian, which is quite pricey for a graphic novel, but it was in hardcover, very nice, very quality paper, and while it was in black and white, it was not it was not pencil drawn or stenciled in. It was very much felt like watercolors, and oftentimes CG backgrounds, but they didn't stand out as much as it would in something like Gantz. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I really liked thick blacks and whites, and I really liked how they actually kind of strewn in some color among specific images. When Bella notices Edward's eyes changing in particular, everything else is still black and white, but his eyes change. And when they get to the meadow, that's when it really explodes into color. Particularly there's a vivid dream sequence as well with color, and I'm not going to spoil all of them. There is quite a few instances of color, but don't expect it throughout. I actually really like this idea. Frankly, wasn't sure how the graphic novel was going to work, but after seeing the general take that they're doing, I like the really thick watercolor art style, and in combination with the black and white, because it really gives it more of a dark feel that I think it works even better than the blue tint in Twilight, which I wasn't quite sure about. I think it accomplishes much the same purpose, with a lot more style. As well, the colors, like I said, strewn throughout, very beautiful, really nicely done. It's a high-quality book, you gotta give it that if nothing else. And outside of being an incomplete story, if you're a fan of the saga, you know what, go pick it up. It's really great if you can appreciate the art style. Otherwise, I really don't have too many complaints about it that wouldn't necessarily be leveled against the story itself that it spawned from. Which, like I said, pacing problems and whatnot. Otherwise, if you haven't picked up Twilight already, go pick up the novel. If you don't pick up the graphic novel first, there's really no point. There's not a huge amount of difference, but if you're going to dive into it, you might as well just go straight to the novels. This is only for fans. If you're not a fan, don't bother. Having said that, I do recommend it. It's a really high quality graphic novel. If you enjoy the story, pick it up.